He thought no one noticed. In the quiet of a mansion he only cleaned, a young black man huddled in the darkness with a worn-out textbook, chasing a dream the world told him he wasn't meant to have. But fate had other plans because that night, the millionaire who owned the house walked in. What he saw would ignite a chain of events no one could have predicted. Was this the moment his hidden struggle would be crushed? Or the beginning of something that could change everything? It was supposed to be just another long night. For Jamal, cleaning wasn't just a job, it was survival. At 22, he had already lived a life that felt heavier than most. By day, he wore the faded uniform of a janitor, pushing carts and mops through hallways where no one bothered to learn his name. By night, he carried something even heavier, the weight of a dream everyone around him said was impossible. Jamal grew up in a neighborhood where the sound of sirens was more common than laughter. Schools were underfunded, teachers overworked, and kids like him rarely made it out. Still, he clung to the belief that knowledge could be his way forward. While his friends gave in to the pull of the streets, Jamal stayed in, buried and borrowed books, his eyes scanning every line with determination that burned like fire. But books don't pay rent, and so he worked quietly, invisibly, cleaning the homes of those who never thought twice about the hands scrubbing their marble floors. One house stood apart from the others, a sprawling mansion on the hill, the kind of place that seemed to hold secrets in every shadow. Its owner, a millionaire known for his power and arrogance, barely noticed Jamal's presence. To him, the cleaner was just another part of the background, like furniture there to serve, not to be seen. That invisibility, Jamal realized, was both a curse and a gift. It allowed him to slip unnoticed into corners, to stay late when no one was watching, and to carve out stolen hours in silence. And in that silence, he studied. Each night, when the vacuum was put away and the smell of polish faded into the air, Jamal would find a dim corner and open his textbooks. Sometimes the only light came from the faint glow of the security system or the moon spilling through tall windows. He would sit on the cold floor, pages spread across his knees, his eyes fighting sleep as he absorbed formulas, histories, and theories. Every word was fuel. Every chapter was a step closer to a future he could almost touch but not yet hold. But this routine carried risk. If he were caught, there would be questions. Why was the cleaner lingering? Why was he using the millionaire's electricity, sitting in spaces he didn't belong? Jamal knew the answers didn't matter. In a world where skin color already painted him guilty, his ambition would only be seen as arrogance. Yet the pull of knowledge was stronger than fear. He told himself he'd be careful. He told himself no one would ever find out. Still, the walls of that mansion had eyes. Security cameras, late-night returns, and footsteps echoing through empty halls always lingered in the back of his mind. He could feel the tension rising, as though the house itself was holding its breath, waiting for the night when everything would unravel. And that night was closer than he thought. Because one evening, as Jamal pressed his pencil to paper under the thin beam of moonlight, he didn't realize the sound of a car pulling into the driveway. He didn't hear the heavy door slam shut. And he didn't see the shadow that had already begun to stretch across the room. The world he had tried so hard to keep hidden was about to be exposed. The sound of footsteps shattered the silence. Jamal froze, his pencil still pressed against the notebook. For a heartbeat, he thought it was his imagination, the creaks of an old mansion settling in the night. But then the footsteps grew louder, measured, heavy, deliberate. His chest tightened. Someone was there. The study door swung open, and light spilled across the floor. Standing in the doorway was the millionaire, his eyes narrowing as they landed on Jamal. For a long, suffocating moment, neither moved. Jamal's textbooks lay wide open on the floor, the words and equations glowing under the dim lamp like evidence at a crime scene. "What are you doing here?" The man's tone wasn't curious, it was sharp, accusing, dripping with the kind of authority that didn't need proof to pass judgment. Jamal tried to rise to his feet, his heart hammering, but his voice caught in his throat. In the millionaire's eyes, he wasn't a young man studying for a better future. He was an intruder, a servant stepping out of line, someone who dared to take up space where he didn't belong. The questions came like daggers. "Why are you here after hours? Whose books are those? Do you think this house is yours? Jamal stammered, his words stumbling over themselves. He tried to explain these were his own books, borrowed from a library, studied only in stolen hours because home was too loud, too chaotic, too dark. But the millionaire didn't hear explanations. He only saw defiance, and then came the words that cut deeper than any threat. People like you don't belong in places like this. It wasn't said with rage, it was said with certainty, as if it were a law of nature, unchangeable and absolute. The kind of statement designed to crush ambition before it could even take root. Jamal felt his stomach twist. He had heard those words before, in different forms, from teachers who doubted him, from neighbors who laughed at his dreams, from a society that had written his destiny before he had even lived it. But hearing it here in this house, with his books lying scattered like contraband, made the humiliation burn. The millionaire threatened to fire him on the spot. "You're lucky I don't call the police," he sneered, his gaze cold and calculating. And Jamal knew exactly what that meant. In this world, a call like that could destroy him. One accusation, and no one would care about the truth. They would only see a black man in a mansion where he didn't belong. But what the millionaire didn't know was that fear wasn't the only thing burning inside Jamal. Anger had begun to stir, quiet but fierce. He thought about the endless nights spent cleaning up after people who never saw him. He thought about the long hours of study, the sacrifices, the belief that education could set him free. And now, in this single moment, it all threatened to collapse under the weight of one man's prejudice. Still, Jamal forced himself to stay calm. Running would make him guilty. Fighting back would make him dangerous. So he stood in silence, his jaw tight, as the millionaire snatched one of his textbooks off the floor. He flipped it open, scoffing at the handwritten notes, the highlighted passages. To him, it wasn't a sign of discipline or intelligence, it was arrogance. The millionaire tossed the book back down, the pages scattering across the floor. "You'll never be more than this," he said, "no matter how hard you try." Jamal bent down, slowly gathering the pages, his hands trembling not from fear, but from restraint. He wanted to shout, to demand to be seen for who he was, but he swallowed it down, because in this house, his voice held no power. At least not yet. And as he closed the final book and clutched it to his chest, one thought echoed in his mind, a thought he would carry beyond that night. "If they're going to see me as nothing, then I'll prove myself as something greater than they can ever imagine." What Jamal didn't know was that this night, the night he was caught, humiliated, and pushed to the edge, would be the very moment that set everything in motion. A turning point that no one, not even the millionaire, could have predicted. Because sometimes, being pushed down doesn't break you, it forces you to rise. The millionaire's words echoed in the room, sharp and final. "You'll never be more than this." For a moment, the silence that followed was heavier than any noise. Jamal stood there, clutching his books, the air thick with humiliation. But then the silence broke, not with his voice, but with the shrill beep of the security system. A light flashed across the study wall. The millionaire turned, his face twisting with fury. "You triggered the alarm," he snapped, as though Jamal had planned it, as though studying quietly in the corner was some kind of crime. The words cut deeper than the accusation. Because in this house, in this world, it didn't matter that Jamal had done nothing wrong. It only mattered how it looked. Within minutes, the sound of sirens tore through the night. Red and blue lights flickered against the mansion's tall windows, painting the walls in chaos. Jamal's stomach dropped. He knew what this meant. He had read the headlines, seen the footage, whispered names under his breath like prayers, names of men and women whose lives ended because someone assumed the worst. Now, suddenly, he was no longer a student, no longer a cleaner, no longer a young man with a dream. He was a suspect. The front door crashed open. Officers flooded inside, their voices loud and commanding, weapons drawn as though they'd stepped into a crime scene. Jamal raised his trembling hands instinctively, the book sliding to the floor with a thud that echoed like a gunshot. The millionaire pointed in his direction, his voice booming with false certainty. "That's him. He doesn't belong here." Every word sealed Jamal's fate. The officers spread out, their flashlights blinding, their commands sharp. "Don't move," one shouted. "Hands where we can see them." Jamal's breath came fast and shallow. He tried to speak, tried to explain, but his voice cracked, swallowed by the chaos. His heart pounded so hard it felt like it would burst. One wrong move, one flinch, and his life could end here on the marble floor of a house he had only ever cleaned. The millionaire stood behind the officers, arms folded, watching with cold satisfaction. To him, this wasn't fear, it was confirmation. Proof that Jamal was what he had always believed. Out of place, dangerous, unworthy. Jamal's knees buckled as he slowly lowered himself, pressing his hands to the floor. He wasn't guilty. He wasn't dangerous. But in that moment, he understood the terrible truth. None of that mattered. His skin spoke louder than his words. His presence screamed louder than his innocence. An officer moved closer, cuffs in hand. Jamal's mind raced. He thought of his mother, who always told him to keep his head down. He thought of the nights spent studying in secret, chasing a future no one thought he deserved. He thought of how easily it could all end here, erased in a single misunderstanding. And then something unexpected happened. One of the books on the floor caught an officer's eye. A thick textbook, its pages filled with notes and diagrams written in Jamal's careful hand. The officer paused, his gaze flicking between the book and Jamal. For the briefest second, the image didn't align. A so-called intruder, but with the markings of a student, a scholar, a dreamer. The room seemed to freeze. Sirens wailed outside. The millionaire's accusation still hung heavy in the air, but the officer's hesitation cracked the scene open, revealing the raw injustice beneath it. Jamal's chest heaved, his eyes burning. This was at the breaking point. Everything he could be, balanced on the edge of a knife. Would he be remembered as a criminal caught in the dark, or as a young man fighting to be seen for who he truly was? The answer wasn't clear yet. But one thing was certain. Nothing would ever be the same after this night. The flashing lights eventually faded. The officers left that night without taking Jamal away, but the scars of what happened remained, etched deeper than any pair of handcuffs could have left. His books were returned to his arms, but they no longer felt light. They carried the weight of everything he had just endured. He walked out of that mansion not as a free man, but as one marked by the chilling reminder of how fragile freedom could be when skin color alone was enough to make you guilty. The millionaire never apologized. He didn't need to. In his eyes, he had done nothing wrong. He returned to his life of wealth and power, untouched, unchallenged, while Jamal carried the memory like a shadow he could never shake. For nights afterward, sleep came slowly. Every siren in the distance, every sudden knock, every glance over his shoulder brought the fear rushing back. Because once you've been seen as a threat, you never quite stop wondering if it will happen again. But fear wasn't the only thing that stayed. Something else had been planted that night, a seed of fire, a determination not to let the millionaire's words become his truth. Jamal knew he couldn't erase what had happened, but he could decide what to do with it. He chose to keep studying, not in hidden corners, not in borrowed shadows, but openly, defiantly. Each page he turned, each formula he solved, became an act of resistance against a system that tried to define him before he had the chance to define himself. Still, the injustice of that night was bigger than one man. It wasn't just Jamal's story, it was the story of countless others who had faced suspicion where there should have been safety, condemnation where there should have been compassion. For every Jamal who managed to walk away, there were others who didn't. Their names filled headlines, their faces turned into hashtags, their families left with grief that never fades. And that's the part that lingers. Because Jamal's survival didn't erase the truth, it exposed it. It showed how close the line is between opportunity and tragedy, how quickly a dreamer can be branded a criminal, how deeply racism can twist even the simplest of moments into life-altering battles. Years later, Jamal's story would inspire others. He spoke not about the millionaire or the mansion, but about the night he almost lost everything simply for daring to want more. His words reached classrooms, community centers, online platforms, anywhere young people needed to hear that their ambition was not arrogance, that their worth was not determined by someone else's prejudice. But the question still remains, the one that lingers long after his story is told. How many more times will this happen? How many more young men and women will be judged not by their actions, but by assumptions rooted in centuries of bias? How many more dreams will be silenced in the dark before the world finally decides enough is enough? Because this isn't just Jamal's story, it's a mirror held up to society. And when we look into that mirror, we all have to decide what we see and what we're willing to change. He walked out of that mansion carrying his books, his fear, and his fire. But the burden of the bigger question rests on all of us. So I'll leave you with this. When the next Jamal is caught in the shadows, will the world condemn him or finally choose to see his light?